Today we are here to talk about our project called Round Ere. So we recently completed a project on how we can build better data systems for the Liverpool City region by working with a local community, employing them as community researchers instead of just doing a project on and about them. So we're here to talk about what we did, what we learned, to share the story and our experiences in doing community-led social science. So first, we're going to talk about what the project was about, some of the lessons learned, and some things that we would do different next time. I am Dr. Emily Rempel, the Public Participation Manager from the LCR Civic Data Cooperative. I am here with my co-investigator, Dr. Gianfranco Polizzi, and our community researcher, Anthony McMullin. Franco, can you tell me a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So I'm from Italy, but moved to the UK in 2016 to start my PhD. And since then, I've been working in academia, doing lots of research, primarily concerned with issues of digital inclusion, inequalities, and issues of digital literacy, namely the sort of skills and knowledge that different populations need to develop in order to use digital technologies.
Anthony, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what brought you to taking part in the project?
Yeah, I've lived in Widnes most of my life. I started working in Liverpool for a bit, and then during the pandemic, came back to Widnes to kind of help support my family a bit more and be a bit closer. And then when I kind of came back to Widnes, felt like more of an affinity for it, I suppose, and wanted to kind of like help the town a bit more and things like that. So I started getting involved in like volunteering work and doing some like community work and things like that. And then I just came across the Round Ere Project on social media. And I kind of, I'm a student, I have like kind of an academic background myself. And so the kind of combination of seeing some kind of like nice academic research focused in my town just seemed like an opportunity to do some real good for the town, but also to get involved in something that was really exciting.
That's great. Fabulous. And if you can tell, we have quite an international team here to talk about the project. I am from Canada, if you can tell by my accent. I want to talk a little bit about the partners that were involved in the project, and then we'll actually describe what the project was. So the Civic Data Cooperative is a project at the University of Liverpool funded by the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority to make data about the city region work for the people who live there. We work on a lot of different projects that look at how to improve data systems, both from a research perspective, but also from a community perspective. We work with our partners from Capacity, a public service redesign agency. So I came to this project around participatory data and community-led social science with a fairly fixed idea of what I wanted to explore. I have, to put it from a very nerdy perspective, a very big passion about data and data systems and how we include community better in how we build data. So it's not just can we take research and data and put it into action, it's how we bring community on that journey to make sure it's doing what they want to see happen in their local area. So I am going to give a bit of background on how this project got started. I have been studying data and data engagement for about 10 years now. I attended a conference in 2017 in Ottawa, Canada, that was talking about community and participatory data. There was a speaker there, Gwen Phillips, who was leading a really amazing project called Measuring Wellness, where they were working with local First Nations communities to build up a data system that was designed by the community themselves, rather than a national survey where the Canadian government told them this is what you should be doing. So I became very invested in understanding how those sorts of projects could be brought over from that Canadian context into a UK context. So when my boss came and was like, we want to do a project that's about building a data hub or a data commons, with community, I was like, I know what I want to do. I want to copy this project I saw done in Canada and do it again here. So I spoke with our friends at Capacity, and they were on board to do something that was really about improving services for Widnes with a focus on how data and research and community could lead and design that project. So we ran a project called Round Ere, which was about building a participatory community data hub. But that idea about building a data hub is a little bit hard to wrap your head around. It doesn't really mean anything to anyone. we wanted to think about how could we take the idea of building a better data system about a community and bring it down to something community could talk about. So we chose the topic of well-being because it's something when you say well-being, everyone has an idea in their head of what that means, right? So the first goal was to understand what well-being means to the area we chose, which was Widnes. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then to take that understanding of well-being and transform that into better measures of well-being for the local area. So we wanted to explore this through the eyes of the people who live in Widnes and with an eye on, in the next phase of the project, imagining better solutions. But why did we choose Widnes? So I'm going to throw this over to Anthony, who actually lives in Widnes. Could you tell us a little bit more about Widnes and how you would describe it to someone who doesn't live there?
Well, Widnes, I guess it's kind of like an old industrial town, and we have this kind of like long history of everyone kind of being aware of that, and it's kind of had a bit of a decline maybe in the past 30 years or so, because this like industry has declined, and there's been like a bit of a change in the economy to like different services and things like that. So living there has kind of felt like a bit. Sometimes it can be a bit gloomy, but we have this sort of like shared history, this shared kind of pride. We have like quite a famous, or was famous, rugby team that everyone kind of like still kind of feels a bit of an affinity for. So like it can be a bit of a kind of a place that's sort of looked over sometimes, I feel like, because it sits between these big places like Liverpool and Manchester. And it's also kind of shared with the council kind of is shared with Runcorn is Halton Borough Council. So we're kind of like really connected to all the areas around us very strongly, I think. It can be a bit of a hodgepodge of a place, I suppose. You know, with lots of, there's quite a lot of diversity of like, you can go down the road and hear completely different accents and things like that. But it's almost like this like diversity kind of brings people together with like to this like strong industrial past.
That's great. Yeah. And when we were studying the project, we were looking for somewhere that had things going on. It's very hard to start any research project in a place where people are really isolated and there's not much happening, but wasn't over-researched. So there's a lot of, a term I hate, but a lot of left behind communities in the Liverpool city region. There's a lot of deprivation in the city region, and that tends to have researchers get really excited about doing a project there because they want to do it somewhere where they think there could be a big impact. But what happens is you get an over-researched community. So when we were having conversations with stakeholders and people at Halton Borough Council, we were chatting through, like, is Widnes a place where there's things happening and people are involved and they are interested in taking part in things, but at the same time, you know, there aren't 10 million research projects trying to cite themselves there because of some false idea of, you know, some kind of superhero complex about coming in. So we were really interested in taking part in a project in Widnes for that reason. I want to talk a little bit more about how we started to design the project. So as I said at the beginning, we wanted to build a community-led social sciences project with the ultimate aim of building a community data hub about well-being. Now, that could be a research project, right? Or it could just be a community project you're doing. So we took the approach that we wanted to do a community project that was at the same time a research project. And so we chose to do participatory research and participatory design. Franco, could you talk us through a little bit how participatory research and particularly community-led social science is different from traditional social science?
So it's not just like studying a particular group and then sort of like studying field work and researching a particular group and collecting and analyzing data about the particular group, but you're doing that together with the help of the very particular community or group, right? And I think that there's lots of advantages there when it comes to conducting participatory research. And I think primarily, oftentimes, I mean, there's an issue around bias when it comes to doing research, right? Because when we're studying a particular group, because we have a different, you know, as researchers, we have different backgrounds anyway, what we bring in is a lot of bias around also what we think that community wants or needs, what their concerns or priorities are, right? But doing participatory research is really is really good because it enables not just researchers to get a better insight into, you know, certain dynamics and, you know, and phenomena that have to do with that particular group, but it also enables the members of that particular group or community to really use their voice and to use their own insights and their understanding of the context and their own community to do research together with, you know, researchers. So it minimizes biases to some extent because researchers, there's still going to be a certain degree of bias no matter what research you're doing. But when you're doing participatory research, you're enabling, you know, members of a particular community to really contribute to, you know, the production of knowledge really and about themselves and about that community. And when it comes to participatory research, I mean, their involvement of members of a particular community can come at any time, right? It can be at the sort of research design stage when you're designing a particular study, but then it can also take place when you're actually collecting data or when you are analyzing that data, right? And this is pretty much what happened with community researchers as part of this particular project, because what we knew was that we wanted to conduct a piece of participatory research precisely because we wanted to be able to somehow empower people from this particular community and give them an opportunity to express their voice and to raise their own concerns and to ask them the questions that they think need to be asked when we're talking about well-being and data. And at the same time, but at the same time, we didn't necessarily know what kind of research design was going to be implemented to then collect and analyze data, because this is something that we sort of, you know, we let them decide for us. So we offered, you know, training, and this was part of the sort of initial idea that we had. We ensured that members of this community were trained in social science methods so that they could then deliberate and choose with our guidance and with our help what the best research design, so that they could then decide what kind of research design could be used to then collect and analyze data about Widnes.
That's great. Yeah. How I've always described it is that because we're trying to understand what well-being means to Widnes and then build a better measurement and data system on top of that, when you're talking about something like well-being, me as a Canadian coming in, right, to a community I don't live in, I had never been in prior to the start of this project, and saying to people, what do you think about well-being, is going to be a very different conversation to someone like Anthony coming in and talking to people he knows or even doesn't know about what well-being means. And the kinds of questions you can then lead on with in that conversation are different to what I would say. So what we're saying is we're trying to do participatory research in this project because we want to, as you're saying, reduce that bias of how we would talk about it versus how people from the area would talk about the issue of well-being. Fab, let's move on to the next part of this podcast. Let's talk about how we actually did the research, what the nitty-gritty details were of how we ran this project. So I'm going to give a quick overview about the approach, and then I'm going to turn over to you two to talk about the day-to-day and how it went. So we worked with capacity to recruit up to 20 people. We got 14 people, up to 20 people who lived and worked in Widnes, to train them in basic research methods, as well as conceptions of what is data, what do we mean by well-being, how do we do research. We then ran a very exciting couple of weeks of training in a local pub where we, at the end of it, co-designed the research method to answer that question of what does well-being mean to Widnes. So the approach that the community researchers chose, definitely with some controversy thrown in there, were semi-structured interviews. We then employed the community researchers, at this point 14 researchers, to go out and interview friends, family, and strangers who lived and worked in Widnes about that question of what does well-being mean to them. So we co-designed the interview guide. We gave everyone details that we'll definitely talk through how that actually went versus how we thought it was going to go. And then we brought back those recordings to do a thematic analysis of what well-being means. And we held 2 stakeholder workshops just a few weeks back to then work through how do we take this definition of well-being and transfer it into better measures of well-being and potentially a digital data hub for Widnes. All right, so alongside this project we were running to build this data hub and understand what well-being means, Franco and I were also conducting an academic research evaluation of the project itself to understand the experiences of the community researchers better and how they thought it was going. Franco, could you talk us through that research approach we took?
Yeah, like you're saying, I mean, there were obviously different layers of research within this project. And this is what I think was particularly fascinating about this project, right? It's the fact that there was a project within the project, if you will, right? Because obviously, we trained, like you were saying, we trained community researchers in research methods, right? And that was fun. I mean, we had plenty of sessions talking about different, methods that can be used in social science research, talking about qualitative methods versus quantitative methods, what the pros and cons are when using a method over another. And it was good because even though, community researchers don't necessarily have an academic background, the kind of academic background that, researchers would have when conducting research, we had very interesting discussions around methodologies and different approaches. And there was a lot of curiosity, right? I mean, we were getting a lot of questions and those sessions went really, really well. And it was thanks to those sessions that then, community researchers felt pretty comfortable in sort of designing, the kind of study that they wanted to conduct with participants from their own communities. And that's a project in itself. But like you were also saying, another layer of research was the fact that we also wanted to capture the sort of views and experiences of community researchers and in terms of, the training that they undertook, but also in terms of the kind of then research that they were going to conduct, right? And that, again, is another project. So what we did was to start with a very first sort of semi-structured interview with community researchers to get a sense of what expectations community researchers had in terms of the training that they were going to undertake, but also in terms of the overall project and why, whether they thought it was important and what aspects of those projects they found exciting and novel and important. And then once they undertook that training, we had another interview with them to get a sense of their experience of taking that training and whether their expectations, their actual experience sort of matched the expectations that they had in the first place. Then community researchers were, trained and they were ready to start field work, and which is when they, conducted the research that they wanted to conduct, and they used the methods that they had chosen to use. And at the end of the process, we then had another interview with them to capture at that point in time their experience of having conducted research.
Great. The thing that sticks out the most for me from all of those phases was the training part, for sure. In fact, we gave the community researchers a series of different social sciences research methods to choose from. And the hottest issue for sure was whether or not we should do a survey or we should do a series of semi-structured interviews. It was almost a 50-50 split. We did a dotmocracy. We gave everyone stickers to go and vote on the board on which method they were most interested in. And we definitely had some hot debate, shall we say, on how that method went. I believe semi-structured interviews won by a narrow vote of 5-4. It was very close. Mm-hmm. But we've sort of described the process there of what we did, the 2 different components of this project. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that gives a great picture of what it was actually like doing it. Anthony, could you talk us a bit through how it was like taking part from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I suppose first of all, it was just really fun. It was really nice to kind of be involved, first of all, with other people in the room that were passionate about doing some good in Widnes. That was really nice as a resident anyway. But then it was also just really quite empowering, I suppose, because, we had academics coming to our town, interested in the town as it was anyway. But then it felt like the process really was collective. Like it didn't feel like, I never felt like it was kind of patronizing, or that it was kind of, we felt like we were really working out this novel approach together in like the best way, rather than it seeming like we were just sort of guinea pigs and you were kind of pretending that, like we were, it was all pre-decided and it was just felt like it was piecemeal or anything. It never felt like that at all. And the training felt really engaging. It felt like everybody was really committed to getting the best out of it. And it was quite effortless because of that, I think, as well. I didn't feel like there was any resistance at any point, apart from, the kind of healthy debate around the actual things that we were doing, right, what kind of research we should be doing, etc. But it felt like it was a really, real substantive kind of experience, where we learned a lot, and then I felt like taking that into the actual research then and doing the interviews. It felt like, I had a lot of stake in how it had been designed. I wasn't just kind of I had a kind of a strong understanding of why we had the questions that we had, and then what we were really trying to get out of them. So it made it easier then for kind of adjusting things on the fly as we were talking to people. It wasn't just here's a list of questions, go and ask these questions to people in Widnes, and then coming unstuck because you kind of don't understand what's going on behind that. It felt like we were really involved, like I felt like a researcher in it as well.
And to build also on what you were saying, there was a bit of a debate, right? You mentioned that too, in terms of like choosing the right research design and the kind of the methods that researchers were going to use. I think that's pretty normal, right? I mean, if you are in a room with like 20 academics, I mean, you're gonna have some heated discussions around the best research design for a particular project, because there isn't such a thing as like the perfect research design doesn't exist when it comes to a particular project. It's always about evaluating different aspects of using different methods, because those methods will come with limitations, and so. I felt in my mind, that kind of debate that we had when you guys were choosing the methods was healthy. It was a very constructive, healthy debate, and it was a very intellectually stimulating debate that we had.
Yeah, it was fun as well because of that. It felt like we were really contributing as researchers. Like I said, it felt like our opinions were really valued, and that if we were never dismissed for anything that. Even if we said something, well, I doubt that anybody even said anything like stupid or silly or whatever. But even if we were a bit, hesitant about raising something, everybody in the room kind of met it with real like seriousness, that what we were saying mattered and that we could really add to the project.
No, it's really great to hear that it didn't feel like we were just researching on you. That is what we wanted to do, is something that felt like we were researching with you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
One of the other community researchers was telling me that at every stage she was going to drop out. Every stage she was like, I'm going to leave. But she said every session she went to made her a little bit more like, oh no, I kind of want to keep going. And I think the strength of that is the fact that we were trying to take a really open approach to those conversations. So we were never just saying, do you have these skills or not? Are you good enough or not? It was like, how can we make this work as a team?
Yeah, I think I remember who that probably was, and having conversations with them every training session that we went to. Kind of, they would say the same to some of us, and we would be like, "No, don't worry about it." We were kind of all supporting each other. That was really nice as well.
You're perfectly right. Yeah, it's such an iterative process, right? The fact that when you're doing participatory research, obviously you can't have everything figured out. You're gonna have to make decisions as you go along, and those decisions are going to have to be collective, particularly when you're working together, with a community, which is what we did.
Excellent. So let's get into the juicy stuff, which is, what did we actually hear? So let's talk through a bit about what we heard from the semi-structured interviews that the community researchers went out and did in Widnes, and then we're going to end by talking a little bit about what Franco and I heard in our interviews that we did. So I'm going to give a quick overview and spend a bit of time on that. And then I'm going to throw over to Anthony to talk through it more because he is the one who did the interviews. So let's talk first about some of the insights we saw around well-being. So well-being in Widnes, we heard what you would kind of expect to hear. It comprises a range of factors, personal senses of well-being, community senses of well-being, and lots around work-related elements. So personal well-being, it included things like health, social connections, feeling connected to your community, your friends and family, having pets, having opportunities to go out and exercise in your community, and a work-life balance. Residents really, from what we heard in the interviews, valued having more accessible services and community assets, things that were available closer to them and that were easier to get to, as well as things that supported a sense of well-being for everyone and not just themselves. We heard from a lot of people talking about what services they thought should be there for their grandchildren and for youth and for their parents, not just the kinds of services they wanted to see for them. We heard a lot about challenges as well, things around transportation issues in the area, limited trust in decision makers, and a lot of discussion around financial constraints, both personal financial constraints and also the financial constraints of the council. So kinds of things we heard were, this is what I would love to see happen, but I know there isn't money for this to happen, so I get why it's not happening. And I think what that really evidenced to me was the conversations focused a lot around hopeful critique. So people were saying, here's what I think goes well, here's what I think does not go well, but I understand why it's happening and what can change. It wasn't people just telling us this is all awful, we don't like living here. If anything, we heard the opposite, which was there's a really strong pride of place in Widnes, and that any measurements or data about well-being and how we track that, it needs to represent that pride of place and that sense of both the current environment, but also the nostalgia and the rich history of the area. I'm going to hand it over to Anthony. Could you comment on like what stood out most to you, what you heard from your interviews?
Yeah, I suppose you kind of mentioned it then, that idea of like a hopeful critique. People, I think a lot of it came down to a sense of an understanding of the way that the situation is, and a lot of it is out of their control. But I think that what kind of struck me was that people were really interested in that community aspect a lot. It wasn't the talk, a lot of the insights that we got weren't just about like how things could be better for them per se. It was how things could be better for the town. And this kind of like sadness about a sense of decline maybe, and not just kind of complaining about the local council, etc. Like a recognition that there have been sort of tough times over the past maybe 15, 20 years. And that's been particularly felt in Widnes. But I think people wanted to maybe have a bit more of a stake in what the decisions were being made for them and for the people around them. There was kind of a sense of a lack of agency, I suppose. People wanted a bit more autonomy and a bit of a stronger say in the decision making, perhaps, just so that even though they didn't think that they could fix everything, or that it was even possible to fix everything that was wrong, that one kind of the hopeful things was that if we all kind of got together and felt that community in a bit of a stronger way again, and were really involved in some of the decision making at local level, and maybe even like sort of hyper local level, like on estates and things like that people would be more receptive. But they felt like, because some of those services weren't really available, because things like community houses and stuff weren't there so much anymore, it was difficult to really know where to start. So it was kind of they felt a bit disempowered, I suppose, but they really did want to do more, which was kind of nice to see. It wasn't just complete apathy or a disregard or even just kind of a selfish regard for what people needed for their own like immediate family. People genuinely seemed to care about what was going on and kind of lamented that kind of decline. I think one of the things that people spoke about a lot was the town centre in Widnes, which people spoke about like the services that were there, the shops, and how there weren't potentially shops there anymore that were there before. But they didn't talk about not being able to get certain products. It wasn't like I can't get X, Y, or Z product because they can just go to the supermarket to get that. What was really stood out was the kind of sense of enjoyment people got from walking through the town centre and having those shops and having it bustling and it feeling like a community that was vibrant and that things were happening together. And if everyone felt like, you know, that they were on equal standing and they were going to like this collective place, rather than it simply just being, we need more like consumer goods or that kind of thing, you know, that kind of like civic action and pride, like that really, really stood out to me.
No, that definitely, it came through really strong, that sense of agency and autonomy that people wanted. It wasn't like, I want to do my own thing, everyone else alone. It was like, I want to have choices in my community that are about how we connect to each other. From an academic perspective, I think when we were talking about designing the project, the risk we had was that we were going to go out to community, right? And they were going to tell us exactly what we already know from the academic literature about well-being. And we're going to have this list of, you know, I walk my dog, I go out here. And obviously people, they absolutely talked about those things. That was in the interviews. But there was a sense of like the specific results about Widnes that were about this thing around autonomy and agency in the community. And you can't disconnect that, I think, from the history of Widnes and how people told the story of their lives to then how you look and measure well-being. I think it really does need to be specifically about what people want to see happen in their community. It's not something that I would then go, okay, we're going to go do this in a borough in London. I would want to do the same thing again because I think that that context is so important to understanding then where you need improvement from data, right? The data is just going to give us like, this area is deprived. It's not going to tell us why, the history, what people want to see change. So the dream of this project, and I think it worked really well, was we were getting those specific context details that we can turn into some kind of resource that helps site services better or do projects around what people want to see change in their transportation. Taking a bit of a wider view though, Franco, could you talk a little bit about what we heard in the interviews we did with community researchers throughout the project?
Yeah, those interviews, as we said earlier, were designed to sort of get a sense of, you know, how, you know, eager community researchers were to sort of undertake this kind of research and their expectations of the training and also of conducting research. I mean, something that stood out really consistently, I think, is that community researchers were very, very eager to do this. For different reasons, but the primary reason was, I want to see change in my community, and I think this project is going to give us an opportunity to ask the right questions, to collect data that is important and that can be used, hopefully and potentially, to generate some sort of impact with a view to improving the well-being of people in Widnes. A lot of people, you know, were talking about their children, for example. They were saying, I am worried about my children because I would love them to stay here and grow up here, but I also know that most likely they will have to leave Widnes because there are not many opportunities here in terms of developing, you know, a career or, you know, finding the right job and so on and so forth, right? So there was, like Anthony was saying, there was, on the one hand, there was a lot of pride, yes. There was a lot of like, you know, like pride and a very strong commitment to changing things for the better. On the other hand, though, there was also the recognition that things in the present in Widnes are not looking great for some reasons in a lot of different ways. And so there was a lot of, I think, hope that stood out as a theme during those interviews, because people were very hopeful that things can go better, that things can improve, and they did, you know, and they did like the idea of this project, particularly because they thought that could be helpful.
Sounds good. Yeah. Anthony, do you want to add anything to that from your experience of doing the interviews?
Yeah, I think, well, like we sort of said, I think that the hope kind of came from a sense of if we could maybe just be a bit more involved sometimes as well. Like, even if the improvement wasn't, we weren't going to fix everything. It was a sense of like, we were doing things together. We were able to accept the situation because we had a hand in doing it. I think as being a part of a community researcher as well, you know, being involved in that, even if we didn't think we were going to fix Widnes. Maybe some people did think they were going to fix Widnes with the project, but you know, it was good as being a community researcher and really having like that kind of strong stake in what we were doing, rather than it just being completely disassociated. Well, not that you were completely disassociated as academics, but you know, we were kind of able to see things from both inside and out then, I guess, which kind of helped. Yeah.
That's great. So doing this kind of community-led social science, this kind of participatory research, I think it can be incredibly inspiring. There was a lot of what we felt worked well, some things that didn't work well. So let's talk through a little bit around that. In terms of what worked well, I distinctly remember doing those early interviews and those first training workshops. So Franco and I, you know, getting the early train at like 6 a.m. to rock up to Runcorn Station and get a taxi to Widnes. We did whole days of like 10, 15 interviews throughout the day. And I remember finishing that first day, we were sat at the public library. It was like 30 degrees out. We were very warm, and saying to each other, like, these people are amazing. Like, I am feeling so inspired just talking to them about their area and what they think about living there in a way that, like, I don't think I was even connected to my own community in the same way I was talking to these people. So I think some of the strength of this method was we found people who were great. If we had done this again with a totally different group of people, it would not have necessarily been the same. I think the specific community researchers we got on board were so passionate. Look at Anthony here on a day just to come record a podcast with us. So I think one of the biggest strengths for me was that community researcher engagement and interest. Like, it was probably one of the most effective facilitation sessions I've ever done, that first training. Not because I suddenly got some magic skills overnight, like Magic Bean style, but because the people who came on board were just ready to jump right in and get involved.
I'm not sure as well if that's necessarily like, you almost describe it like it was a bit of a stroke of luck, I suppose. But you know, that you got the people that you got. But from speaking to the people in our interviews as well, like, I think generally people are really interested in and engaged in what's going on in the town, but maybe feel a bit like disempowered, disenfranchised. And I think sometimes it's easy to overlook the insights of, you know, working class people in these places, because it's easy to turn them into statistics of, like, you know, like you said earlier, you know, there's deprivation, et cetera, and they need outside help, they need intervention, et cetera. So I'm skeptical as to whether you were lucky and whether or not you could have, you know, if you did it again, you wouldn't find another group of 20 people that were just as engaged, to be honest. Maybe I just have too much faith in the people of Widnes, but.
No, I love that. That's great. No, definitely. And I think you're right. It is somewhat giving people that opportunity instead of just saying, here's 20 people, we're going to interview them and leave it at that, right?
Yeah.
No, I love that. One of the other things I think went well, speaking of that, is the focus on both well-being and data. I think if we had just done one or the other, well, I couldn't just do well-being because my organization is the Civic Data Cooperative, but I think just well-being, it still would have worked, but I think the line to data is clear from an organizational academic perspective, clear to impact, right? There's a lot of research around well-being. That is not an under-researched academic area. What there isn't is a lot of connection to then impact and how we design services. So I felt that worked well, as well as the conception of well-being being something to bring people in, right? As I said at the beginning, when I say the word well-being, everyone has something that pops into their head about what makes them feel well. Yeah. One of the struggles, I think, is then to say to people, you know, well, what do you think about data and measurement in your community, right? We'll talk a little bit about that. I want to ask you both to chat through a little bit on things you thought went well. So I'm going to ask Anthony, can you talk through what went well in terms of doing the interviews, and Franco, a little bit on what went well in terms of doing your research-based interviews?
Yeah, so I think everybody, to start with, I didn't really have any problem getting interviewees. I spoke to a few people I knew, a few people I didn't know, but everybody was really interested in being involved, because like I said, they felt really engaged, and I think that everybody did have this strong idea of well-being and a strong sense of community. So they really felt like people did have a lot to say.
yeah, the interviews went really well because obviously participants, community researchers were very, eager to share their insights and because they were all very motivated in terms of taking part in this project. So it wasn't really hard to elicit responses. It was, the interviews felt really, were very easy to conduct, and everybody was very chatty, and it was really easy to talk about important things in a very smooth sort of manner, really. In terms of the project itself, what I think went really, really well is the training. The training was great, and it was great because something like training in social science research methods can be quite boring, for people who have not necessarily chosen an academic career, right, or who haven't chosen to undertake doctoral studies, for example, right. So I can see how something like that can be, for a lot of people wouldn't be fun at all, but we managed to have a lot of fun. It was, those sessions were great. People really enjoyed the topic. They were curious. They were asking questions, and so I thought the training worked really, really well.
But you never thought that people could be so passionate about surveys.
That's right.
I didn't.
Versus semi-structured interviews.
And other methods as well. Yeah.
I did not expect someone to come up to me after and go, I need survey to win, and me going, okay, I can't guarantee this for you. Anthony, do you want to share a bit?
Yeah, well, I suppose I can only really echo what Franco said. The training was very easy. It was fun. Like I said earlier, we felt like we were all kind of collectively doing it, and that really worked well. And I think because of that, it felt like it was easy to kind of ask for help, for when things like in interviews, like everybody had like a slightly different way of working. I think we were sharing interview like recordings and things in slightly different ways. People had different, maybe like literacy as far as like technology went, but everything was very mutually supportive. So that kind of worked really well. And then when we were speaking in the interviews, I felt like, again, all the participants that I interviewed were like really engaged, really interested in the possibilities of the project, and wanted to have more of a say. Like that was kind of like, I suppose, one of the things that we found. Like we said, people wanted to be able to give their opinion and hopefully have something come from that.
So we've been very positive so far. Everything was great. There was never any problems in this project, smooth, But as with any multifaceted project like this, there were certainly challenges that we faced. I thought it might be nice to each share a challenge we experienced, something that didn't go quite so well, and then how we addressed it. I'm going to go to you first, Franco, and then I'll finish with my own thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I think a challenge that is somehow sort of intrinsic in doing sort of participatory research is perhaps expectations that people involved in doing research may have, and the extent to which a particular research project can generate meaningful impact. Because as I was saying earlier, a lot of the community researchers involved in this project were very eager to take part in this project precisely because they thought that this project could help, their community, and make a change, right? And we know that, participatory research is generally conducted with a view to empowering communities, because as we said earlier, you're minimizing bias, you're also enabling participants, community researchers in this case, to ask the right questions and to be involved in different stages of the research. But it's also equally important, I think, not to overpromise to some extent, because obviously when it comes then to translating findings into actual change or impact, there's going to be different stakeholders that are going to be involved in that process, right? It's something that research can only achieve so much, but there's going to be much more that is not going to be in our hands, right? Because we're going to have conversations with local government, with policymakers, with organizations in the third sector, and so on and so forth, right? And so I would say that, potentially, for me, the biggest challenge was to make sure that, yes, we are, empowering community researchers and Widnes and people in Widnes through this project in some way and to some extent, but at the same time, while at the same time also being conscious of the fact that we cannot overpromise and that a lot will need to follow that goes beyond what we can do as researchers.
Absolutely. Anthony, what was the challenge for you?
I suppose even though I felt like pretty well prepared from the training, taking that leap from training in kind of interviews to then doing the actual interviews was quite challenging at first, because even though I said people were like really eager to be involved, when they were kind of sat in front of you then talking, sometimes there were a few times when people would kind of like close up and weren't really sure how to respond. And I think it took a bit of practice, I guess, after a few interviews to kind of see how people responded to the questions that we were using, the kind of prompts that maybe you could use, and also resisting the temptation to just talk and like kind of let people speak. So it was kind of challenging to get that balance of how to do the interviews properly, because we did a lot of talk on research methods and we did some practice in that as well. But then being sat in front of someone was a very different thing. And I guess it's hard to do that, to like kind of replicate that environment, particularly people who aren't academic researchers and maybe didn't have some practice of that, doing degrees, etc. beforehand. But I found that the semi-structured aspect made it really helpful, because we could kind of improvise a little bit. And I found that there was one instance where I was speaking to somebody and it was very much just like one word answers, even though that they'd really been involved, like they were really eager to be involved, and it was kind of like, ask the question, one word answer, ask the question, one word answer. And then as we kind of went on and I started to really see what they seemed to care about, I would sometimes just like repeat back what they said to me. Sometimes not just the single word, but like kind of rephrase it, and they really did open up. And by the end, we had this really great conversation about how they didn't feel like they had the kind of autonomy, that they didn't really trust decision makers. And there was like a really insightful conversation that from what started out, that the thing was just that they didn't like the work, that kind of thing. It was really interesting to kind of like go through that process and kind of deal with that challenge. And then it felt really, really like really like empowering, but like really inspiring then to see like, oh, people really do want to talk about this stuff, even if they don't seem like it to begin with.
No, that's excellent. And two very different but similar perspectives in terms of thinking about the process of doing the interviews, but from the academic expertise versus the practical side of trying to get people to answer a question, which, to be honest with you, is the exact same problem Franco and I have with many different interviews. I remember doing the first couple I did during my PhD and just being like, what am I doing? I have no idea how I got myself into this position. I want to share something that's maybe a little more on the very, very practical side of things, which is the process of doing this for the first time. So I've done a lot of public engagement and participatory projects, but I have never done it at quite this scale. So we had a big team of people, both from Capacity and from the Civic Data Cooperative and the University of Liverpool, but everything we were doing was for the first time. And figuring out those institutional processes to do genuine, open, immediate participatory research was definitely a challenge that we had to navigate. There were a lot of timescales that I would have preferred to be faster. Small things forgotten became bigger issues when we have so many different people doing so many different projects and interviews at the same time. We overcame all of those essentially by dedicating a lot of time and effort, particularly from Capacity's perspective, on just being available nearly 24/7 just in case something went wrong, and things did go wrong. But I think the best thing we can do now is take those resources and all those challenges, and we're writing them up essentially and saying, you don't have to go through this exact same process, because like we've mapped it out now. And I think the second time around will be a lot smoother. Some small things like informally giving the number of interviews people had to do in a conversation was not the way to go. And if I had thought through that through more, we had some participants do 50 interviews, some do 10, some do 2. And I think there's obviously a big challenge in making sure that everyone feels that they're very clear on what they're doing. We gave people, I think, 10 different forms to read through before they started the interviews. I think if we had more time, we would have definitely just sat down with each person and been like, this is the number of interviews, do it this way, instead of doing it sort of at the speed we did it. But with a lot of dedicated work, it all came fine. We got lots of excellent interviews from people, and we really, honestly, this is one of my favorite projects I've ever taken part in. I had a great time doing the planning and the delivery, which is pretty rare. Usually by the end of project, I'm ready to pull my hair out. So this has been great. I want to end by talking a little bit about what next. So as we mentioned, the purpose of this project was to both understand what well-being meant to Widnes, but then with an eye on building a resource to measure that wellness better for community, to really bring data into action. So we're going to do that next. We're actually going to build that data resource. The Civic Data Cooperative team is doing a project called the Data Commons, which is about collecting together the data sets that already exist about the Liverpool City region, and in particular Widnes. And then we want to design projects that look at what we heard from the interview. So we'll be working with the community researchers to look at that next phase of the project. But I want to finish by sharing our final thoughts on how it went. Anything that we didn't talk about, do you want to mention? Or any other stories you want to tell? I'm going to tell one story while you're thinking. So after Franco and I finished the interviews the first time, we were really, really hungry. So we decided, this is the first day of data collection for a brand new project. Let's go and get, a pint, a meal perhaps, on the university's dime. We started walking. We went into the first pub near the library, and they were like, we don't sell food. And we're like, oh, okay, that's fine. Like, we'll go to the next place. We don't sell food. We went to a second pub. Then they're like, well, there's a sandwich shop. Why are you coming here for food? Like, go to the restaurant to get food. We go to the restaurant, it's closed. We go to the sandwich shop, closed. We started walking up the main street. 45 minutes of walking later, we get to the town center. We go to the pub that's right at the edge of the town center. They don't serve food either. We go to another place, and they looked at us and they're like, why would we serve food? And we're like, okay, we're seeing a theme here, and we are clearly the ones at fault for the places we are approaching. We walked by a cafe, but we were so hungry. We're like, no cafe sandwich is going to fill this void in my stomach now. So we kept walking, The 10th pub, I think, we went to did serve food, and we had an excellent meal, a good pint, got in an Uber, slightly tipsy, and that was how we launched the project from the research interviews. So what would you two like to share? That's not necessarily going in the podcast. I'm just doing that to...
It's your own experience with Widnes Town Centre.
Yeah. 3 p.m. on, a Tuesday is not the time to be getting food. Let's just put it that way.
I agree, Emily. This has been such a great project, and I hope that we can use this project and elements of this project, for example, the fact that it is, a piece of participatory research, to then design new projects that can build on what we've done.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth saying that as a resident of Widnes, as one of the community researchers, that the impact of just the doing of the research can have on some of us and the people that we've interviewed, knowing that people are interested, if a lot of the insights were the idea of being looked over, to have people wanting to shine a light on Widnes and its people and try and make things better for them, even if we might have overblown expectations about what that might be, et cetera, et cetera. But I think just it's really nice as a resident to see that interest, and there's a benefit felt empowered, felt like, more hopeful just for everybody being brought together on this project, even regardless of the impact as the result. Like, I think it's worth emphasizing the impact that just doing the project can have even before it's finished, because I saw all of those community researchers being like, every week kind of being engaged, really happy, all of the team kind of really happy to come to Widnes, which is not something people probably feel often. But, and I just think that's worth pointing out, because it's, even if the projected impacts or what we hope to get out of the project in the end doesn't transpire, I think it was worth doing just for the impact that it can have on the people that were involved in it, because they are residents of Widnes. I think that's really good.
That is an excellent thought to end on. So I want to say thank you to you both for coming here to do the project and for taking part in this interview / podcast. And as we finish writing up these reports, you can learn more about the work we've done at civicdatacooperative.com, and stay tuned.